We called the show Mahalla because this is the name of the cultural, urban, political and social phenomenon that we are presenting here in Venice. It is a very beautiful word. It means neighborhood. So it speaks of a community, but also of a place in a city. And we believe that Mahalla is almost a claim towards this question, how we will live together. Because we think Mahalla could be an interesting alternative model to the anonymous global city. And under this consideration, Mahalla might even give an answer or a part of an answer to the question how we will live together.
When we've been contacted by the Arts and Culture Development Foundation from Uzbekistan to curate this pavilion here, we didn't know so much about Uzbekistan yet. So, of course, for us it was first to understand what is behind a cultural heritage and an urban heritage of Uzbekistan. So we just had the chance to do one first travel where we could go and get a more general idea of the whole country. We concentrated on a few places, but we could understand the difference in case of the geography, the climate, the different also cultures which are within Uzbekistan, which is a very rich country in terms of culture. But then we actually decided to focus on Tashkent, because it's there that we found a very authentic way of living within these areas, neighborhoods, which are called makhallas. In Tashkent, the very fascinating aspect about it is that people still live there. These neighborhoods are very lively. They are also changing a lot. People are building new houses in them, but still very much based on the same urban pattern, which is a kind of a carpet city, let's say the vernacular-oriented city, as we know it as a phenomenon which is also international, but in a very, let's say, specific and particular way in Uzbekistan.
The Mahalla shows that rural elements like production of food, like animals, and the urban as a kind of complex organization of a society comes together. So that the urban and the rural is not necessarily excluding each other, but could also find a different way. If we speak of a Mahalla as a potential model also for development, not only in Uzbekistan, but globally. When we talk as designing architects, that the Mahalla could also show us ways of bringing urban and rural elements together or overcoming this kind of simplest model of these two different, distinct parts.
So it's about combining the two parts of our living condition on the planet. And to a certain extent in the Mahalla, you find a combination of these two opposite poles of contemporary life. Looking at the examples, looking at the actual buildings, the courtyard houses with their gardens, we find this specific condition of what we call urban-rural living. A community of people gathered around this central space, which is a garden, but in the center of the city.
How we will live together? This question asks also a very fundamental question about architecture itself. What is the relation of the built building, of the built city, of the built settlement, and life? Life of human beings and of even nature and animals maybe, you know? How this relationship of architecture and of life will come together.
There we have been always accompanied by the CCA Lab, which is a laboratory for young students of art and architecture who engage with Tashkent as a city, also as a cultural heritage again. And they have been really a key partner within the project because they went with us, of course, in terms of doll matching, but also explaining to us the different cultures within Uzbekistan. Most of them are also from different cultures themselves, and entering houses within these mahallas, translating, explaining traditions and ways of living. And this was really extremely rich as an experience.
This group of people that shared the interest in understanding more precisely what the Mahalla nowadays is about, these young colleagues, becoming artists, other students who went to these families, into these houses and spoke to the people and made interviews. And I think this is essential because then somehow they could translate back and tell us about what they find, how it came about, that house looked like this and how the family would use it, you know.
This hospitality of people, very spontaneous, come in, elderly ladies, elderly men in a rainy Monday morning in Tashkent, and showing their houses, but also their life, being proud, showing us around.
The collaboration and the exchange with people in Uzbekistan and in Tashkent was absolutely crucial to the project.
We have been really fascinated by the way we have been welcomed by the people there. All the people let us enter their houses, which are very intimate.
There is a small contribution, but literally the central one of this pavilion here is the tabchan, an object that was designed and produced by the students of the Center for Contemporary Art in Tashkent. So the students designed a contemporary interpretation of the traditional embroideries. So this collaboration that was so important for the research also played a central role in our presentation here in Venice. Well, the project started as a research project.
And so we selected about 10 mahallas, which we surveyed very thoroughly with different means.
The first problem we had is how to look at these neighborhoods, at these big vernacular neighborhoods in Tashkent. So it was a question about the method, and it ultimately was a question about the right people to do it with.
We as curators and as architects, we did the research on the architecture, on the city, we drew plans.
We surveyed 21 houses. We also redraw some cadastral plans and tried to gather as much information as we could on these buildings and areas.
And our method, our research method, is the typological survey. This means we are studying and collecting information that is typically on plans and drawings. So we were looking at city maps, and then we used drones to produce images and orthogonal photography of whole parts of the city in order to understand the layout of the buildings. And then we will also use 3D scanners to get maximum amount of information on these buildings that we were surveying.
Having all this material in 3D, so really like a lot of digital material, which we could use in many ways, we took the opportunity to do some images, but most of all to do an application for iPhone and Android, which allows you to literally walk through 6 different houses, which we chose from 6 different mahallas. It gives us somehow really the whole atmosphere, because you really have the opportunity to just discover space by space what's happening in these different rooms, and most of all also the atmosphere of the garden. Within the app is sound also embedded, which has been chosen by Carlos Casas, who is the artist who also worked on the sound in this pavilion. And so we are really into kind of a realm of the Mahalla atmosphere. So this was important to us also, really to try to engage with the ways now people would actually use this type of research and not stay only within a kind of a more analog way of documenting. But in terms of analog documenting, we produced a survey, which is actually a box with 3 volumes, where one can see all the plans, all the maps, all the research we've done, and also some images by Bas Prinsen, which are printed on high-end paper, and which are actually hanging here today.
But we also understood that there is more needed. We should add another perspective, another standpoint to our research. And we knew Bas Prinsen, and interestingly enough, he already had a connection and on his side an interest towards the cities in Uzbekistan. And so we asked and invited Bas to contribute his very specific artistic view on architecture. That is very much about the physical reality of a sample of a built wall, for instance. The texture, the physicality of it, in a very poetic and artistic manner. And we thought, and I hope the show communicates this, his images are a fantastic complement to our more academic and scientific representation.
Bas Prinsen images are one-to-one images of details, not only from this house, but also from different houses. It focuses really on the materiality, and these images allow actually really to transmit the strength of the materials there, which are the gesso, the wooden, ornamental arts.
Carlos Casas, as a sound artist and a filmmaker, again has a totally different standpoint, a different perspective again. And it was all about the sound, the noise, the animation of the spaces, of the surfaces that we were describing and looking at and documenting with our scanners and drawings.
He's been really recording the noises within these different houses. So people, but also noises of the gas going through these pipes, cats, animals, because there are actually quite often animals in these courtyards. He allows us to somehow feel one day within a house in the Mahalla.
Bas Prinsen and Carlos Casas, they, through their art as photographers, as artists, as sound artists, they have the means and the sensitivity to document life.
For us, it was very important to try to show a real-life experience of what we could engage with in Tashkent.
This sensation of life, of everyday life in the Mahalla, turned out to be a very essential layer to our documentary.
So we chose one of the houses, which is within one of the most historical areas of Tashkent, and we reconstructed it as a one-to-one wireframe architecture. It's a kind of open-ended, three-dimensional collage, because what we also absolutely not wanted is to have something somehow finished. We wanted to have installation which allows people also to imagine something within it, and not somehow come with too many answers, but maybe hints into what could be this kind of living together.
We were traveling from Khiva to Bukhara to Tashkent to look at the Mahallas, and we very quickly decided to use this idea of a one-to-one, so almost a one-to-one approach, so you could experience one of these spaces. Me as a photographer, I am, of course, photography normally is a reduction of reality, so things get smaller in the representation of the photograph. To do one-to-one is something I'm very interested in, so to almost copy elements that are in the houses, in contemporary houses, in historic houses, and to mix those two. So the installation in the end is this big representation of one house, and then we place the pictures, there are 12, in corresponding positions of where the house. So it starts with the first picture that is outside. It's a kind of a blank wall of straw and gypsum. And throughout the building, you will find details, aspects, small versions of what you could find in that particular room. So it is a recreation, but still you don't see the whole room, you only see a fragment. And this fragment will make you maybe imagine how the whole structure would be. In order to reach the idea to copy something, we developed this new method of printing. So the printing is done on a gesso-coated aluminum, which makes sure that you don't have the reflection, but also that it doesn't use chemicals. So it will maintain for 50, 60, 100 years without being changed. And I think this is important because we want to understand, or I want to understand also, that this photography is not only a kind of a quick representation, but it's something that can be kept, that can be studied again. Since it is one-to-one, you can understand it not only as a kind of a memory, but also as a tactile copy of a real space.
The research that was developed for the Uzbekistan pavilion in Venice was very much looking for the possibility of creating an actual architectural model of some of these houses in the Mahalla through sound. Sound was for us a very important element to actually connect and develop, establish a connection with the public, and properly one of the most strong ways to document and also to create a model of these mahallas, of this living, you know. The installation also used in this matter the latest technology in spatial sound capturing and also in spatial sound diffusion. So basically the whole pavilion in certain aspects becomes a total sound model of some of these houses. The other element that is important to speak about is that the sound is exactly in real time, which means that the spectator enters the house at the same time as it in Venice. So at 1 o'clock there is a praying time, the lunch time. So all the equivalent of the living moments of Uzbekistan are transcribed through time in real time here in Venice, allowing the spectator to actually totally be transported to Tashkent, to these mahallas. You know?
Exhibiting architecture is really a difficult thing. No? How do you show architecture, or how do you show exhibition that discusses architecture? Our exhibition is not a discourse, it's not a theory, but it's a physical model. It is reduced to its geometry, it's reduced to its surface, but it's a real building within a real architecture. It's within this architecture of Sansovino. So this is also important. We are here in Venice. We bring the Mahalla, this issue, from Uzbekistan to Venice. I think this is important that we create here a concrete space. It's not a black box. I think this process of developing and understanding what we actually do was very, very, very important.
What we like is, yes, it is a translation. It is, to a certain extent, also a reduction. The house in which we're standing right now is maybe more a model. It speaks about the type, so the essence, the structure of a typical building in a mahalla. It speaks about the idea, and still you can physically and spatially experience it. That's what we try to achieve. So on the one hand, it's very immediate, it's very physical, as I said, but it's also intellectual. And we also like that in a way it's open-ended, it's unfinished. So we were always hoping that our installation is expressing a sense of openness, of also maybe transformation and dynamics. And we were saying it's a bit like a mental construction site. Everybody's invited to contribute and to become part of this ongoing process and the debate on what Mahalla actually is and where it will go in the future.
this collision of these three models, you know, the photography, the sound, and also the wireframe that represents the wireframe of these houses, was for us a very important, in a way, composition. We had to really find the perfect balance between these three elements. I think that in terms of the collection of data, for us, the only way to do that was to really provide a proper archive of how this living happens in order to gather this sound ecology of the region for future generations to be able to witness or to know how the living conditions of this time were happening, and also trying to understand how this idea of the crossing between the rural environment and the urban environment was happening in places like Tashkent today, you know, and how these two modes of living can coexist, can live together.
We believe it could be an interesting example also for us Western architects to study even more in depth and to get inspired from. Maybe we can learn something from it. Because an idea of a building, not the physical building itself, this will always stay and remain in Uzbekistan. But the idea of these buildings, and maybe also the idea of these local communities, is something we can learn from, and we could even maybe transfer into a different context. That's a speculation, but I think that's what the Biennale ultimately is about.
So entering this world stands at the beginning of this exhibition project, discovering a world which is not exceptional. No, it's in architectonical terms, it's not an exceptional building like a museum or an infrastructure building, but it's somehow in Uzbekistan the normal case. And we are very much interested in the normal case because the normal case defines how a society, how a community works, how a community organizes itself.
So it's not so much about the past, it's not so much about preserving, it's not nostalgic, it's not about heritage, it's about the future.